Hisham is a very exceptional person. He was born in Dheisheh camp. He was born blind in Dheisheh camp in a tent. Somehow got a PhD in international affairs and has taught international affairs here in the States. And then about a year ago, decided it was time to go home.
The psyche of the people has been extremely devastated. After 7 years of intifada activities, people feel that their activities didn't really pay off. They have been hindered, they have been aborted, and not much has been achieved.
The purpose is to beat down the people so that if there are any improvements, the agreement can be said to have created a few improvements. Isn't that really what this is all about?
Palestinian society, regrettably, at least it's the political side of the society has been utterly defeated. I have no doubt at the same time that the Israelis have won quite an impressive victory. They have been able to build their own society. At the same time, they have been able to almost liquidate Palestinian society institutionally, socially, psychologically, economically, and politically.
That the regimes that are in power, and the Americans, who of course play the role as superpower, and the Israelis as a role as regional superpower, you're suggesting this is a reasonably stable arrangement and likely to continue then?
In the Arab region, my view will be out of questions pertaining to culture, to civilization, to prosperity, to modernity for quite a long time. It's not the case that there are no talented people there. It's not the case that there are no skilled people. But it certainly is the case that such talents are suppressed, liquidated, marginalized, or basically forced to leave the region.
What about the role of the Islamic national movements, which, if you would agree with me, are a counter-reaction to all of the things we've been talking about?
Their influence will be on the rise as well, to varying degrees in the Arab world. They will continue to pose a threat to certain governments. But again, I think their role will be contained. They will be contained, and by the governments as well as by other interested parties.
You're watching Mideast Realities. My name is Mark Bruzonsky, and our guest is Hisham Ahmed, Professor of International Affairs, who got his PhD here in the United States, but who lives now in Dheisheh refugee camp, where he was born, outside of Bethlehem on the West Bank. What you've outlined, Hisham, if you were an Israeli strategist or an American strategist, what incentives are there to give the Palestinians any further rights? There's certainly no incentives, from what you've said, to allow an independent Palestinian state.
Well, quite frankly, if I were an Israeli strategist, the first thing I would ask myself, and I'm sure they ask them, they ask themselves this question maybe constantly, is why should it, I mean, what is it that should make us give the Palestinians anything?
I mean, other than considerations of justice and human rights and decency, all those things that that nice people talk about.
But no, even that is not granted, and I don't think we should make any mistake about it. I mean, life in the occupied territories has not gotten any better. The occupation is still there, deeply entrenched. Sure, the soldiers are not seen on the streets of Gaza on a daily basis, but their presence and their influence is constantly felt. And certainly they control people's movement in and out of the strip. Whenever they want to close the gate of this jail, they do. Whenever they want to open it for whatever reason, they do nonetheless. They do that as well. So the occupation is still there in full-fledged. There are no changes on this front whatsoever.
But you do foresee changes, don't you? There will be Palestinian police expanding to other cities. There will be a veneer of Palestinian control, short of independence. I mean, I use the analogies as a Westerner of Bantustans and reservations. Do these reservations, do these concepts have a resonance with you as well?
Indeed they do. Every city, every town, every camp has been turned into a reservation, isolated from the rest. And that's exactly what autonomy, I mean, in the legal sense, really means. Whether this autonomy, of course, changes, transforms into a state is something I strongly doubt. And if it is to be transformed into a state, it will be quite a fragile, totally submissive state, a state that will be lagging behind as far as world civilization is concerned. It will be
Well, we have a term for this in the West. I mean, Noam Chomsky is the person who uses this term the best. I mean, client regimes, that essentially we're living through the creation of the Palestinian client regime, just as 50, 60 years ago this happened in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the Hashemite regime of Jordan. I mean, you, the Palestinians, are now joining the family of Arab nations.
The way it looks really right now, it might be a little bit even more visible, or I should say, there is greater dependency by Palestinians, by Palestinian society on, let's say, on foreign aid, more so than most other Arab countries, simply because of the nature of Palestinian dispersal, the composition of the leadership, the makeup of the organization, the nature of the political structure of the movement, I mean, of the society in its entirety. So my real fear is whenever someone who pours in foreign aid or who contributes some type of foreign aid to Palestinians wants to turn it off, they will do so. A function of that right away will be either starvation or submission, or a combination of the two, as is as is taking place right now.
You've written that you think what's happened in the last couple years is worse than what happened in 1948. Can you elaborate on that?
You know, of course I wasn't around in 48, but what I constantly keep hearing from people who lived the events of 48, I mean some of them at least, is that in 48, I mean, there was a lot of course, dispersal. Palestinians were dispersed to all kinds of geographic locations, I mean, within Palestine as well as outside Palestine. Of course, there was a lot of killing. I mean, many people perished. A lot of many towns were totally destroyed. And that was, of course, painful. I mean, it was a catastrophe, as it is known in Palestinian history and Palestinian discourse. But as the story goes, Palestinians were not prepared for the events of 48. In other words, it was not a far-fetched conclusion that they will be the losing party in 48. People knew that right then. Now, in 84 and in 94, Palestinian society has advanced so much in too many different ways, in spite of the occupation, harassments and oppression, in spite of the dispersal. But the sense of Palestinianism continued to be intact throughout these years since 48. Although Palestinians were dispersed to too many places in the world, they continued by and large to feel Palestinian, to belong to a cause, to belong to a people, and more importantly, to belong to a homeland, which gave them a sense of strength that enabled them to go on in spite of the oppression, in spite of the diaspora. But now, that sense of belongingness has been disrupted, if not cut. Now Palestinians living in parts other than Jericho, other than Gaza, and even in those parts, don't really have a sense of future that will keep them feel as being Palestinian. So there is spiritual dispersal now, which is by far more effective than the sheer geographic dispersal, which is in itself painful. But the spiritual dispersal has toppled, I mean, that feeling of belongingness. It's belongingness to the abstract it has become right now.
Well, let's be brutally candid about this. America got concerned about the Palestinians because in the 60s and 70s there was terrorism. There were airplane hijackings, there were people being shot, there were airports being attacked, and there was this Palestinian cause, and the world took notice. Under the new conditions of the New World Order, with problems in Bosnia and Korea and all over, not to mention the American streets, where we have probably more shootings in Washington every weekend than you have in Palestine. Why should Americans be concerned with this anymore?
I think they simply really won't.
I didn't ask if they will or won't. I asked why should they be?
Well, the problem is that I feel that they really won't be concerned.
Mm-hmm.
They should be concerned, of course, because they have been, at least as far as the totality of the system is concerned, they have been a part and parcel of the conflict. The United States, its various subsequent governments have contributed to the deepening of Palestinian miseries and suffering by allying themselves, of course, with the adversary of the Palestinian people, and that in itself, of course, should be that role itself should be reversed. I'm not too optimistic that it will be reversed, but
other than moral concerns, you don't have an answer to the question.
That is correct.
Which probably guarantees that you can't expect much in terms of assistance or change of policies from the government of the United States, which we all know, it's no secret, especially for those of us who live in Washington, when it comes to matters relating to Israel and the Middle East, is pretty much dominated by the views of the Israeli lobby.
And that's why I really don't see the change coming. The United States wants stability in the region that would serve certain interests, stability that would help the service of interests. Aside from that, I don't foresee the change coming. No.
Now, you, of course, are a secular person, in many ways westernized, since you spent a good part of your life here in this country. But when I visit that part of the world, I find, among the young people especially, among the deprived young people especially, tremendous interest in Islamic culture, Islamic history, in asserting their national pride, in asserting a different future for themselves. You don't seem very optimistic at all that those forces are going to play any significant role.
Well, maybe it's because I don't want that to be the case. I guess the sense of secularism really drives my thoughts and drives my thinking and my desires. But the reason many people turned to Islam as, in a way, a reaction, quite a strong reaction, to their disappointment, I mean, in the secularist movement over the years in Palestinian society. Throughout the 70s, throughout the 80s, the secularists dominated the society politically and socially, and certainly people expected some results. The fact that there were no concrete results that people could feel on the ground led many people to turn to Islam as a way of trying to fill the psychological vacuum, the social vacuum they have endured.
And do I hear you saying that you think the turn toward Islamic culture, we call it in the West, Islamic fundamentalism, is not a very good alternative? You would prefer the domination of Western culture and secular ideas?
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be the case that secularism will have to be fully equated with Westernism. Although, of course, if one has to view it that way, well, that's fine. But what I'm saying is that after a while, I don't know how many years, my fear is that there will be some disappointment also in the role of Islamic movements. That Islamic movements themselves would not be able to bring about the desired change. At that stage, people are not going to turn back to secularism. They're not going to continue adopting and endorsing and embracing Islam. My fear is that they will turn to something else, which is where the danger really lies.
Well, please tell us.
If they give up hope in secularism, if they give up hope in religion, I think they will really adopt a carefree type of attitude, which will lead to the increase in real social problems, perhaps even to the spread of gangsterism in the society. I mean, if people are desperate, if they don't see that leaders are not able to deliver, if God is not able to deliver, therefore nothing works, and basically they will have to just go on a rampage to get what they want. And in other words,
Look, it's the role of honest intellectuals, honest observers, people who aren't being paid by any government or any particular interest to say, you know, most of the people in Washington are in fact paid to come and say in front of the camera what their keepers want them to. But you're not offering, you really seem to see a very gloomy future for the societies in the Arab world. One of suppression, one of oppression.
I don't want just to say that the future is going to be difficult, especially as far as Palestinian society is concerned, and I think we can apply that to the, at least many parts of the Arab world as well. Sadly enough, I mean, there hardly seems to be a semblance of a future to speak of difficulties. The sense of peoplehood is in real danger. The social fabric is being cracked, is being almost destroyed. The value system has collapsed. The psyche, the spirit of the people has been demoralized. It will have to take, I mean, shattering earthquake, so to speak, to bring about a real fundamental transformation of the society. And I cannot think of the means, of the ways, of the circumstances that can be combined to achieve that.
You don't see a return to terrorism, you don't see an Islamic bomb, you don't see a military challenge. Don't forget, we've just gone through a cycle of history. America just had 500,000 forces in the Gulf a few years ago. Lebanon was destroyed. Egypt is in turmoil. Algiers is in turmoil. My impression is a little different than yours. My impression is that all of this oppression and submission is causing a counter-reaction that's very powerful, and that it's very attractive to people who haven't been westernized, gotten PhDs from American universities, able to travel back and forth. People, as you well know, 99.9% have never been out of the countries where they live.
I fully agree with you that there is a growing, at least subconscious, counter-reaction on the part of the people. But quite frankly, and I do strongly feel about that, it will take a long time, I don't know how long, for that subconscious counter-reaction to be transformed into a conscious, initiatory type of thinking or work. The people have been crushed. The society has been crushed. It will take time for it to revive. I'm not saying that it's a hopeless case, no, but beating the people on the head time and time and time and time again certainly led them to collapse for a while.
Hopeless, it depends on your perspective. If you're an American or an Israeli, and your goal is to have policies in that part of the world that are amenable to your own, and economic interests that are cheap oil, lots of petrodollars, lots of Boeing airplanes and AT&T contracts in the Gulf, things aren't hopeless at all. Things are pretty good. The issue is if there's a challenge to that status quo, and if that challenge has any substance to it, which would be the only reason that the American empire should consider changing its policies in order to avoid a future that wouldn't be so nice.
I think it will take time for this change to occur. It won't be in the it can't be in the near future. The region is not ready for it. The people are not ready for it. And even contrary to what I myself used to believe, I mean, the culture is not ready for it. It will take a long time.
All right. Let's go back to Palestine for a moment. We're speaking with Hisham Ahmed, Professor of International Affairs, who lives in Dahisha Camp on the West Bank near Bethlehem. And who's been living on the ground while all of this international diplomacy has been taking place. The PLO has arrived. The PLO is in charge. It's impossible to predict with any certainty exactly what's going to happen, but give us your sense of the dynamics. What's going to be happening in the next few years? What's likely to now take place?
Well, I think the next year or two will pose an existential type of question. I mean, a major test for Palestinian society in general, especially for those who were involved in the current agreements. The question that is to be answered yet is how will people live under a Palestinian umbrella in Gaza and in Jericho? Will people's daily life change, and if so, in what form will that change really take? We're talking about an economy that is totally dependent. There is no infrastructure, there is no self-sufficiency. Given that, I cannot see how concrete improvements on the ground can take place unless Jericho and Gaza become highly industrialized in a couple of years.
Well, what's all this money for? What are all these millions and millions of dollars designed to do then?
Well, we keep hearing about that over there, but
Well, it's just begun to flow. I mean, there's no question the money is being given. There's no question the Israelis and the PLO want to see economic improvements. It's the only thing they can offer. They can't offer political and existential improvements.
well, quite frankly, I don't think that all that is being publicized will be coming. But assuming that it does, and it will, all right, it will be basically to to replace the political considerations of the people, the nationalist aspirations of the people, basically with economic. I mean, this is this was the formula. I mean, implemented in Europe after World War II. Of course, it's the form, in the form of containment. I mean, through economic means, Europe can be kept silent at least. I mean, no conflicts in Europe will take place. It's a form of containment. But, Jericho and Gaza are not Europe. And I don't think that all of this economic aid that we keep hearing about will be flowing to that
So
area.
you're suggesting that just like they have hyped the political rhetoric to make it appear that some important agreement breakthrough for Palestinian rights has been achieved, they've also hyped the economic in order to give themselves a certain legitimacy, and you don't even think the economic is going to come forward very far.
That's indeed a fair, I mean, that's my assessment. There will be some economic help coming from time to time, to keep the people, to keep the society in suspense, but nothing beyond that.
So to go back to my use of the term Bantustan, essentially Palestinian pockets will be established, Israeli settlements will remain, Israel will remain, it's the Alon plan, repackaged in all kinds of forms, but it's nothing to be thought of in terms of Palestinian rights or Palestinian statehood.
This is the meaning of defeat. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. You represent, you come fresh, you're only a few days from there, and I've known you for some time, and I can feel in the way you even talk to me right now a sense of impending doom and impending. You have nothing positive to offer at this point for your own people.
The one thing I have been stressing there, and I keep stressing, I'll constantly, I'll continue to stress, is that I think, this is not easy for me to say, but I think Palestinians, the Palestinians will have to give themselves a lapse of time and not think too much for a while about territoriality, about geography, about any of these very difficult questions, almost impossible questions to resolve at this stage. I think there will have to be a tremendous focus devoted by every Palestinian, individually as well as collectively, to truly building, if you will, the human being. The human resource is at this stage the most important asset that Palestinians should preserve and maintain.
If you were religious, I'd say you're saying that in the future maybe a Messiah will come and lead us out of this. But I know you're not religious.
That's really the case. But the reason I'm saying that is I can't see any answers to be provided as far as geography, as far as territoriality, as far as political arrangements at this stage to be provided in a manner that will be satisfying, to the Palestinian people. It's not easy to isolate these questions from the overall picture of things, but if more effort is devoted to truly build the society from within, I think that will be more beneficial for the upcoming phase.
We've been speaking with Professor Hisham Ahmed. My name is Mark Bruzonsky, and this program is Mideast Realities. And please tune in at this time every week for another show, Mideast Realities, what's really happening in the Middle East today.